My mother is a helper. Since I was a child, my things have been my cousin's, and my family's things are my uncle's. Just because I cut my hair in the first month, his mother thought it was my uncle to death and followed my aunt to frame me. 1. My mother is a helper. I got a serious illness when I was 4 years old, and I couldn't cure it. At that time, my family didn't have money to treat me, so my father found a lot of people and put it together, and then he paid for my medicine. I thought I could be saved, but my mother stole the money and gave it to my uncle secretly. At that time, my uncle was about to get married, and the dowry was almost enough. She gave the money to her mother's family, completely ignoring me waiting to buy medicine to save her. When my father found out, he rushed to my grandmother's house with me and asked my mother and uncle to hand over the money. This is my own brother, and he is short of tens of thousands of yuan. If I don't help him, he may not be able to marry this daughter-in-law. My mother said with a sob, with a grievance in her eyes. My father was so angry that he kicked over the stool and pointed to my mother's nose to question what to do with my illness without money. She said, "Xiao Chao will definitely get better by himself, but my brother is getting married soon. Can't wait. I only have such a younger brother. Do you want me to ignore him?" As she said, she cried with tears in her eyes. She didn't know how much she had suffered. Besides, the sky and the earth are big, and the uncle is the biggest. Xiao Chao will have to rely on his uncle in the future. Didn't I pave the way for him in advance for his good? At worst, let Xiao Chao go to the old man Li in the village and ask him to treat him. Lao Litu is a barefoot doctor in my mother's village. He never prescribes medicine to treat people's diseases, but uses fushui to treat all kinds of diseases. Of course, my father won't, but he can't help it. Later, he didn't get the money back. My father left a sentence, "fucking bullshit," then lifted the table and rushed out. During the time they quarreled, my mother stayed at my mother's house. My father took care of me all day long, and I was getting thinner and thinner. Fortunately, after some time, I did get better by myself, but the root of the disease was lost. My physical physique has been very poor, and I have been sick since I was a child. However, when my mother came back and saw that I could walk on the ground, she proudly praised that she was a lucky person, had foresight, and did not spend the money in vain. On the other hand, she counted my father in the village, saying that he was careful and machismo, and she couldn't see her supporting her mother's family. When my father found out, he was so angry that he almost divorced my mother. It's just country love. There are many twists and turns. How can it be so easy to separate? 2. During the summer vacation of my sophomore year of high school, as soon as I got home, I found my cousin and my aunt sitting in my living room and watching TV. My cousin was playing with my rem and other toys in his hand. I was in a hurry. I was afraid that my cousin would play badly, so I approached him to remind him to be careful. As a result, he cried out with a wow. The aunt was in a hurry. Her brows were turned into hemp flowers, and her two thin lips issued a spell. "Xiao Chao, it's not your aunt who said it was you. What's wrong with lending your brother to play with this thing? I won't break it for you." As soon as the aunt finished speaking, she only heard a click, and the head of the handheld thing was broken. This REM handheld toy was made by me for more than half a year following the glue guy on the internet. The workmanship is realistic and the details are invincible. It is my most precious one. With a dark face, I grabbed the damaged hand toy from my cousin's hand, suppressed my anger and reminded, "Auntie, I played badly." In an instant, my cousin cried louder, shaking the world, like a piglet being slaughtered, which was annoying. My aunt was anxious and hurriedly held my cousin in her arms and stared at me. "It's just a toy. If it's broken, it's broken. What's so fierce? How much is it? Auntie will compensate you." I silently stretched out my hand and 2 fingers. 2,000. What? My aunt's mouth opened into an O shape and pointed at me angrily. You little calf, you blackmailed your aunt's head. Is there any reason?" "Oh, the child's father. We are so miserable." At this time, my mother came out of the kitchen and hurriedly comforted her cousin, as if the crying one was her own son. When she coaxed her cousin, she got angry with me with a resentful face. "He Chow, as soon as you come back, you quarrel. You are so old, and you still play with these shabby things. I'll give them to your cousin later." I was speechless, went back to the room silently and closed the door. From childhood to adult, because of my mother's generosity, my cousin deservedly bought a lot of good things from here. But in fact, my cousin is only 4 years younger than me. At this time, he is already a junior high school student. I'm afraid only my mother will accept such a sad cry. Every time I resisted, she was angry with me, saying that I didn't know how to understand her and wouldn't let my cousin. If she couldn't resist me, she would bow her head and stop, showing a look of dying or living, as if I had committed some unforgivable sin. 3. However, even if I locked myself in the room, my mother still didn't stop. She smashed the door with a thud, and asked me to come out and apologize to my cousin. I was very irritable, but I didn't want to quarrel with her because of it. I simply replied, I know, and didn't squeak. Who knew? She suddenly exploded, and her voice roared a little. He Chow. You're dead inside, aren't you? Who do you show your face to? I really raised you for nothing. Just saying a few words that you are not happy. Who am I doing this for? Her voice became sharper and sharper, piercing the door panel and my heart. When she was young, she may have been tired. She kicked the door hard and muttered, Eat, eat, and he will starve to death. For my cousin is my uncle's only son and my grandmother's only grandson. I remember when I was a child, I went to my grandmother's house for the spring festival, and my grandparents prepared red envelopes for me and my cousin. The thick red envelope was an indescribable surprise for me at that time. So the moment we received the red envelope, my cousin and I cheered. Just as we were about to open the red envelope, my mother's face changed. She quickly held our restless little hand and stuffed the red envelope back into our pockets. She said, It's impolite to open the red envelope immediately after receiving it. Her tone was strong, but when I looked at her doubtfully, her eyes were a little dodge. At that time, I didn't care. I just thought it was my mother's teaching, but later I realized that there were only 200 yuan in my red envelope. But because they were all 10 yuan bills, it looked very thick, and my cousin's red envelope was full of old people's heads, a full of 1,200 yuan. I ran to question my mother why grandma was so biased. She said that because I was the elder brother, I had to give way to my cousin. After my father knew about it, he went to my mother to explain. Then my mother cried and said that her cousin was in primary school and wanted to buy a learning machine. But because her uncle's family didn't have money to buy it, she felt that her cousin was really pitiful, so she wanted to help her like this. But I also want to use this red envelope to buy some school supplies, and it's better to change another school bag. After all, I bought the school bag I used 6 years ago, and my brother has never broken the toy since he was a child, and he will throw away one every now and then. That night, I also knew that, in fact, the red envelope my grandmother gave to my cousin was only 800. My red envelope is 600 yuan. It was my mother who secretly took out the 400 yuan in my red envelope and stuffed it into my cousin's red envelope, just to make up the money for my cousin to afford the learning machine he wanted. She is really my good mother. 5. After a while, my father came back from outside with his uncle. My father was a little surprised to see that I was not here. Where is Xiao Xiao? Didn't he come back today? It's in the dead room, my mother said in an unkind tone. Pop, and slapped her chopsticks on the table. My father ignored her, walked to the door of my room, knocked on the door gently, and asked me to come out for dinner first. Then I put down the toy, opened the door and came out. Dad, Uncle. I sat at the table eating silently and stopped talking. My mother glanced at me, and her mouth began to be restless again. Little rabbit, I'm not familiar with it at all, so I can't be as obedient as your cousin. I know how to eat. How can I eat you to death? I glanced at it and saw a faint smile on my uncle's family. Laugh at your uncle. The cousin on the side shook his legs while eating, which made our chairs sway back and forth. I glared at him in a blink of an eye, and I didn't know if I really scared him. He leaned back, and finally he fell to the ground and cried again. I didn't realize what was going on. The next second, a slap suddenly slapped me in the face. I looked at my mother in disbelief, and my head buzzed. All right. My father stood up suddenly and pressed my mother's shoulder to let her sit down. Xiao Xiao, you go back first after you finish eating. After saying that, my father's eyes signaled me to go back to the room. In the room, I heard my mother start to keep outputting again, accompanied by her sobs. It's a sin. My son is disobedient when he is old. Don't pull me. Let's see if I don't beat him to death. After a long time, my uncle's voice came from outside the door, with some mocking. Okay, sister, don't be angry. Xiao Xiao is in puberty now, and it's normal to have a little temper. I clenched my fists and trembled all over. 6. My mother didn't do this to me before. She never hit me, and she tried her best to buy me what I wanted. Later, after her uncle got married and gave birth to a cousin, she slowly changed. All the toys originally bought for me were given to my cousin. The 4-inch birthday cake that can be eaten every year was gone, so I bought an 8-inch cake for my cousin instead. The agreed roller skates were gone, and a few days later my cousin had a Morphone watch in his hand. Sometimes I suspect that my cousin is her own son, and I may have been picked up by her in a garbage heap. I also asked her why she could buy so many things for her cousin, but she was reluctant to change my school bag. At first, she would rub my face and explain to me in a soft voice. Until later, she would only send me off on the grounds that children don't care about adults. I used to think that it was just because my uncle had just come out of the society and had no money in her hand. She saw that her uncle and cousin were pitiful, so she wanted to help her, but that was not the case. Just because her cousin was her uncle's own son. Grandma's family is a typical family that favors sons over daughters in the countryside. My mother's education since she was a child is that daughters are worthless, and the boy is the baby, so the daughter should unconditionally supply blood to the boy. However, my uncle not only doesn't even have a serious job, but also is very good at gambling. He originally had money to get married. After all, he was his grandmother's precious son. How could he not make plans for him? It was just that he lost all the money as soon as it got into his hands. My father also introduced him to the job of a carpenter apprentice, but he was so low-sighted that he didn't like the meager salary at all. In the end, he was able to live on the help of my mother and grandmother over the years. Sometimes when my father knows that my mother spends money out, he will quarrel with my mother. At this time, she will restrain herself, but as long as her uncle speaks in person, her pocket can't be hidden. Counting the money I lent to my uncle's family over the years, I haven't brought it back, which is simply a bottomless pit. Sister, brother-in-law, I have something to discuss with you. Uncle opened his mouth again. Every time he comes to my house, it can't be as simple as just having a meal. Sure enough, his next words made me so tender that I just want to say, I have never seen such a shameless person. 7. Sister, I want to take down the supermarket in front of my house. I asked someone. That store has at least 1,000 yuan of water a day, and there is a lot of money in a year. But I almost have money in my hand. Can you? When my mother heard it, she seemed to be very happy and busy. She boasted that her uncle had a brain and was looking for something serious. She must fully support her and asked her uncle if she was short of money. If she was short of money, she would borrow it from her, and she didn't have to rush to pay it back. I secretly opened the door and happened to see the displeasure on my father's face. But he didn't say anything. After all, over the years, my mother has borrowed more than 30 money from my uncle, but 20. No more money can shake his numb heart. Sister, I've calculated all the money in my hand now, and the startup capital my mother gave me. We still lack this number. He stretched out 3 fingers and looked at my mother. My father and I were relieved at the same time. Fortunately, we were only 30,000 yuan short. In my impression, it's not that my uncle didn't borrow money to do business, but he was lazy and couldn't bear the hardships of doing business at all. The money he took to do business often failed in a short time, and the longest support was only about half a year. For this reason, Grandma's pension has been put in. If our family hadn't given some money to the elderly from time to time, I'm afraid my grandmother would have followed her grandfather long ago. But even so, I haven't seen my grandmother be polite to me and my father over the years. Although my family is not rich, my father is also a small leader in the company now, and his monthly salary is about 1. Although my mother has no education, she gets up early and goes to the stall every day to make money. But fortunately, she is caught up with the wind. Now she is also an internet celebrity snack stall, and her income is no less than my father. Although the 30,000 yuan lent to my uncle is destined to be a meat bun to beat the dog, there is no return, but it can also be exchanged for the peace of my family for a period of time. Presumably, my father can still accept it. Unexpectedly, my uncle is the reincarnate of the chicken fairy, and a sound can shock people to death. Sister, it's 300,000 yuan. What? I almost didn't shout. My uncle has no ability, but his heart is very big. In the past, it was okay for him to fight and make trouble. This 300,000 is not a small amount. Sure enough, after listening to it, my father's face turned pig's liver in an instant. He touched my mother with his elbow and signaled her not to agree. My mother really didn't agree, because there is not so much money at home. My aunt's face immediately became gloomy, and it was my parents. Is there such a sister and brother-in-law like you? When it comes to money, you turn your face. We don't borrow money to do something bad. As for that, my father's face became more and more ugly, as if he was on the verge of an outbreak. Seeing this, the uncle quickly waved his hand, stopped his aunt, and then told us his trek harmlessly. Sister, brother-in-law, I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's impossible for you to pay 300,000 yuan at once. So I found my friend in the bank. As long as you mortgage your current house, he can lend money immediately. My uncle is so considerate. This is also really Chi-Chi. His mother opened the door for Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi has arrived at home. My mother secretly glanced at my father's expression. When she found that he was obviously not happy, she avoided my father's sight and secretly signaled my uncle to talk about it next time. I know that even if my uncle's family is sent away today, my mother will find a chance to secretly raise money for my uncle. But won't he gamble with the money lent to him? Will he be a little grateful? 9. Seeing this, I know that I can't let my father fight alone anymore. I suddenly opened the door, walked to the dining table, and asked my mother loudly, Mom, do you want to lend him this money secretly? I pointed to my uncle. I said, Uncle, doesn't your own family have a house? Why don't you mortgage it? As soon as she heard this, her aunt was not happy and asked with her neck, In case the house is mortgaged, where should we live? Haha, it turned out to be this intention. It seems that they were prepared not to pay back early in the morning. My father also reacted at this time and pointed at my mother and threatened, Zhang Yuanyu, If you give them the money, we will divorce immediately. Aunt-in-law, seeing that the situation was not right, he immediately became angry and pointed at me and my father and cursed. Your old family is not a good thing. You want to kill our family, right? Well, then I won't live. I will die in your house today. After saying that, she got up and was about to walk to the kitchen. Her uncle hurried up and pulled her. Seeing this, my mother was also anxious. She rushed up and slapped me. She stared at me with wide eyes and her voice trembled. That's how the school teaches you, isn't it? Look, I won't beat you to death today. The hot tingling sensation on my cheeks burned my soul, just like the nameless fire that has sprouted in my father's heart for more than 10 years. My father patted the table and said, Enough! Hee-Jun, why didn't I find you so selfish before? I was really blind before I married you. Looking at my mother's hysterical appearance, my father was also completely angry. He blushed and drove his uncle's family out. Get out of here! When my cousin went out, I saw him spitting on me, and his eyes were full of disgust. As soon as the door was closed, my mother roared like a madman. She lay on the ground and danced. She was full of accusations that we made it difficult for her sister to behave. She didn't consider her feelings at all, saying that our family was a beast, and she shouldn't have given birth to me in the first place. My mother didn't joke. She could really do it. After all, I was not my mother's first child. 2 years after my mother and my father got married, my mother found out that she was 2 months pregnant. My father was so happy that he said that he was going to be a father. My mother was in a good mood, and even picked up her name early. Later, when my grandmother learned the news, she called my mother back on the grounds of going home to take care of herself for a few days. My father didn't doubt that he was there. He personally packed up his things and sent my mother all the way back to her mother's house. Originally, I thought it would be enough to stay for a few days, but I didn't expect that my mother stayed at my grandmother's house for 2 months, during which she did not allow my father to visit. When she recovered her health and went home, my father found that her complexion was extremely bad and her mood was extremely depressed. From time to time, she would lose her temper, which made my father-in-law, the second monk, confused. But he didn't care. After all, a woman's mood is sometimes strange and unpredictable when she is pregnant. But later, my father found that my mother's stomach had not grown at all. He happened to hear about my mother's abortion. He immediately realized that something was wrong, so he went to confront my mother. This confrontation almost made him breathless. It turned out that at that time, my uncle and aunt had just confirmed the relationship and wanted to get married as soon as possible. But my aunt's mother's family required that the dowry and the wedding room were in place to agree to the marriage. Grandma couldn't get so much money, so she told the other party to slow down. She wanted my mother to help her, but she happened to be pregnant. Not only can she not make good money in the future, but she may also have to spend a lot of money. So, in order to make enough money for the dowry and the wedding room this morning, my grandmother asked my mother to abort the child. Ironically, she didn't have enough money in the end. It was her uncle who asked her aunt to tell her family that she was pregnant that her family finally agreed to the marriage. My grandmother was very happy, and my uncle was also very happy. Even my mother was very happy, but my unborn child, who didn't know whether it was my brother or sister, couldn't come back. 11. After such a quarrel between me and my father, our family and my uncle's family have completely broken up. My mother cried all day long, blaming us for causing her to rebel and leave. I want to say that it's not us who hurt her, but the mess in her mind. In order to prevent her from secretly mortgage the real estate certificate, my father locked all the real estate certificates into the safe, changed the lock of the cabinet, and also reissued a bank card, and put all the savings at home into the new card. After my mother found out, it took 2 weeks to stop the trouble. But since then, she and my father have slept in separate rooms. After the summer vacation, I basically don't go home on weekends. I stay at school for self-study, which is much quieter. I just call my father every month to ask about his family situation. Don't worry, Xiao Qiao. Your cousin has been in trouble recently and has no time to take care of our family. I was in the interest. Although it was a little immoral, I couldn't help gloating over the disaster. My father said that my cousin touched a girl's ass at school and was forced to apologize by the girl's family. Uncle and aunt touched someone, and now it is said that they have received a court summons. 12. This spring festival, my mother didn't ask me to go to my grandmother's house with my father. She just packed up and went back by herself. She didn't come back until the school started. The next day, my mother called. My mother stole my life-saving money, just to let my uncle marry his wife 39,103. She didn't say anything, but couldn't help sobbing. After a while, she asked me to go to my grandmother's house with my father. When I asked her why, she didn't say anything, but quickly hung up the phone. I'm very confused. What's worth my mother's heartbreak? What happened to grandma? Although grandma is a little biased, she, after all, it's my grandmother, and the old man is just imprisoned by those old thoughts. It's not all her fault. Thinking of this, I quickly contacted my father to prepare for departure. At this time, I never thought that I almost missed my uncle's funeral because of hesitation. 13. My father and I cleaned up briefly and went to Grandma's house. In the winter in the north it was freezing cold, and I covered myself firmly from head to toe. When I arrived at my grandmother's house and looked at the white wreath at the door, my pupils suddenly narrowed. On the wreath it turned out to be a photo of my uncle. What's the situation? Uncle is dead? When we got into the room, we saw a group of people kneeling on the ground, crying in front of the black and white photos of their uncle in the funeral hall. Of course, my mother and grandmother were also included. Only my cousin sat aside and played with his mobile phone expressionlessly. I retreated silently and re-entered the house when the people who came to condone were almost dispersed. When my mother saw me coming in, she wiped her tears and motioned me to see my uncle off. Although I don't have much affection with my uncle, my mother is my mother after all. At this time I didn't think much about it and went to my uncle's photo and knelt down. At this time, my grandmother's mouth trembled, suppressing her inner sadness and reminding me, "Xiao Chao, worship the dead with piety." She motioned me to take off my hat. I never thought that when I took off my hat, I became the target of the public and was almost strangled to death, because I cut my hair. 14. My uncle died last night, and his body was not found until this morning. According to the police, my uncle went to a friend's house for dinner last night and got drunk. Suddenly, he wanted to find the family who had a lawsuit with them, so he rode a battery car out of the village alone in the middle of the night. Unexpectedly, because he was not familiar with the road conditions, the dark night and his vision was unclear, and the influence of drunkenness, he was careless on the way. He fell into the river and drowned. He still told his family when someone passed by in the morning and called the police. I put when my hat was taken off. My aunt saw my clean hairstyle and her eyes turned red in an instant. She bounced up from the ground and rushed over and strangled my neck. I said, how could something happen to his father? It turned out that you, a little beast, cursed him to death. I'll strangle you, the murderer. I'm weak when I'm young. In the face of my crazy aunt, I can't even stand it. If my father hadn't pulled my aunt away, I might really have to explain here today. My uncle was cut to death on the first month. This is what I didn't know today. I didn't cut my hair on purpose. Yesterday in the afternoon, because of the school's notice that school is about to start, every student must tidy up before returning to school, so I went to get a haircut. I looked at my mother. She just knelt on the ground in silence and didn't say anything. It seemed that she acquiesced to my aunt's behavior. Auntie, X can eat randomly, but not talk nonsense. My uncle died in a car accident. What does it have to do with me? I pushed my father away and looked straight at my aunt. You little beast, your uncle was killed by you. Whose nephew went to cut his hair on the first month? I know, you are just worried that your uncle won't return the house to you, and you cursed him to death. What a cruel heart. What kind of house? My father was stunned and looked at my mother with burning eyes. I reported the loss of the property certificate. I went to borrow money. What are you talking about? My father is clever. I still have the money. My mother hurriedly explained. I really can't stand it anymore. Does she have to empty our family to give his gambler brother back? Haha. Zhang Yuanyu, you're a fucking stupid ex. The flame that my father had been in his heart for more than 10 years finally broke out at this moment. Grandma, who had been silent for a long time, finally couldn't stand it and scolded us loudly for disrespecting the deceased. Money, 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 money. Money is known all day long. He-jun, your brother is dead now, so as I said, you take out 300,000 yuan and let your brother and sister open a supermarket. Anyway, Xiao Chao is still young. It's good for you to earn the house by yourself in the future. Why do you call me young? I frowned, but it was full of elders here, and I didn't have a good attack. Fortunately, my father was strong enough this time and directly refused my grandmother's request. He-jun, make it clear, if it weren't for your He family, how could my brother die? Now can't I take out my own money to help my sister-in-law? I really appreciate it. Speaking of this, my father and I have no reason to stay here anymore. My aunt determined that I was the murderer. If it hadn't been for my father's threat to call the police, she would not have let me go easily. But in the end, her dark expression reminded me that the matter was not over yet. 15. Really? A few days later, the next email from the account with the ID, "Let's go to hell together," in the postbar will be called, Beast. The vicious nephew cut his hair on the first month and cursed his uncle to death. It fermented rapidly on the internet and dominated the hot list for several days in a row. I clicked on the article, and the whole article accused the nephew family of being extremely small-minded in ordinary days. When something happened to their uncle's family, they not only didn't help, but also drove the uncle's family out of the house. Moreover, the family was extremely jealous. When they saw that their uncle was suffering, their life would get better. But this nephew cut his hair in the first month. The forced uncle died in the underworld on the day of family reunion. At the end of the article, the author also pleaded hard, saying that the family is almost killed by this nephew. They don't want revenge, and they don't want the nephew family to bear the crime. They just hope to let their mother and son go, give them a way to live and don't kill them all. Every word is crying blood, like a victim, which is not only pitiful to make people sigh, but also so weak that it is heartbreaking. If I hadn't known that this article was written by my aunt, I couldn't help but be moved. Oh my God. My aunt doesn't tell the truth at all. Sure enough, the comments below the article all present a one-sided situation, or persuade the author to live a good life and not bow to the wicked, or curse the nephew family with the most vicious words in the comments, or call on relevant departments to intervene in the investigation and vow to severely punish the murderer. I also tried to explain the truth of the matter, but the comment would be deleted immediately. Some rational netizens also explained in the comments that the statement that the uncle died of the haircut in the first month actually comes from the misrepon of the haircut in the first month and think about the old, but it will soon be completely submerged by these electronic saliva. After all, the truth of the matter is not important. People are always more willing to believe in the weak in order to highlight their distorted sense of justice. My aunt's account has gained a large wave of fans, and she even took this opportunity to start a live broadcast, continuing to cry and complain day and night, and the number of fans soon exceeded 1 million. Taking advantage of this opportunity, my aunt even started to carry goods live. While relying on performance to harvest a large number of live gifts, she also relied on buying inferior products to harvest users, which can be called a winner in life. What I didn't expect was that she was so bad that she revealed my home address to netizens. As expected, my family received a box of blades the next day. When I go back to school in the school, my classmates pointed at me behind my back. Before class, my books were torn up, and I was spit on inexplicably on the road. Even the teacher looked at me with disgust, as if I really killed someone. In the end, the school directly ordered me to take a year off when the situation was wrong. My father was almost fired by the company. If he hadn't had a good relationship with the leader, he would have been sitting at home and drinking the northwest wind at this moment, but he was also asked to stay at home indefinitely. What makes me most uncomfortable is that in this series of things, my mother has always been silent and never appeared again. 16. At this point, if we don't fight back, we will be forced to die by this woman sooner or later. Therefore, I asked my father to sort out all the money he lent to his uncle over the years. Those who have receipts should take receipts, and those who don't have receipts should take the money. On the other hand, I ran to my aunt's account with the ID of murderer's nephew and posted comments crazily, questioning her if she dared to tell the truth. Sure enough, as soon as netizens saw this ID, they exploded in an instant and made their aunt respond. However, how dare my aunt? While fooling netizens, she hurriedly banned me in the live broadcast room. There are also some smart people among netizens who look at their aunt like this and raise doubts one after another. What kind of anchor are you afraid of? Fill him. Is the anchor guilty? It can't be a cannibal to learn steamed buns, right? Seeing that the situation was a little bad, my aunt made a big move. I was watching the play in my aunt's live broadcast room with a small account, but her big move made my heart sink to the bottom. 17. Hello, everyone. I'm He Chao's mother. My brother's death is indeed related to my son. As soon as this came out, my family and I were convinced. My mother stabbed me in the back and forced me to death. Sure enough, the omnipotent netizen quickly confirmed my mother's identity, and this time he confirmed my evil deeds. Looking at my aunt's smug look, I realized that if I didn't fight back, it would be over. Fortunately, the evidence I asked my father to collect has been collected, and I did not hesitate to click Apply for Connection in my aunt's live broadcast room. The sudden pop-up of the connection request scared my aunt. When she saw that it was me, she hurriedly hung up the phone. I applied again and she hung up again. Netizens all hold the mentality of eating melons and don't think it's a big deal, and make their aunts accept it. My aunt can't stand it anymore. I'm relieved. I straightened up and briefly introduced myself. Hello, everyone. I'm He Chao, the vicious nephew in the anchor's mouth. I quickly found the evidence that my uncle's family had asked me to borrow money before, ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands. The number was amazing. Good man, does this child have a mine at home? Anchor, come out and explain. I want to see the face. Seeing that the wind direction had changed, my aunt was anxious and wanted to close the connection, but she didn't dare after being threatened by netizens. I continued to put up evidence, putting out the image of an uncle who is good at gambling, idle, and has achieved nothing. It's not over yet. We also found evidence that our cousin molested girls. As soon as it was released, we were reminded that the live broadcast room had been closed. I curled my lips unsatisfiedly. Is this breaking the defense? Since I came forward, there have been clear curses under my aunt's account, and all the harm once inflicted on us has now been returned to my aunt. I thought she was wrong at this point, but but I didn't expect that our family would receive a lawyer's letter 2 days later. However, when I read the content clearly, I was completely impressed by my aunt. How could she actually sue me? I don't know which master told him that my behavior constituted an indirect murder. The reason is that I knew that my uncle would die in the first month of the month, and I had to get a haircut. In the end, it did lead to my uncle's death. There are motives and facts which are in line with legal elements and is reasonable. I said hello. If I hadn't watched Mr. Luo's videos a lot, I might have really believed it. I'm afraid my aunt has met a liar. The key is that my aunt also asked my family to compensate him with 1 million yuan, and my mother specially called me and asked me to admit my mistake. Xiao Chao, mom is also for your good. You can apologize to your aunt on the internet. She won't investigate you in large numbers. If you don't understand, just ask, is my mother useless? 19. The results proved that my aunt was indeed in an emergency and rushed to the hospital. She saw that the account she had worked hard to get up lost countless fans overnight, and the rest were all black fans who had not been scolded, so she thought of taking legal channels. But she didn't know where she found the big lawyer. After fooling her to pay the lawyer's fee of 20,000 yuan, she left a stupid X and endless sarcasm and disappeared without a trace. She called the police, but found that the other party's login address was not in the country and could not be inquired. From then on, both my mother and my aunt suddenly became peaceful and did not come out to be demons again, which made me spend a pleasant study time. My mother may feel sorry for me and hasn't come home for a long time. After the previous incident, my father and I unanimously decided that if my mother could not realize her mistake, it would be difficult for us to treat her as a family member again. Facts have proved that I still underestimated their big man. 20. One night, there was lightning and thunder outside the house, and there was a strong wind and rain. I was missing homework because of the leave of absence before tutoring at home, but there was a sudden knock on the door outside the room. My father went out on business and hasn't come back yet. I can only suspend the work at hand. Who is it? I asked tentatively, but the knock on the door suddenly stopped. I was alert in an instant, looked around, and confirmed that the windows were closed before I relaxed a little. I had a feeling that the people outside the house had not left, so I asked again. This time, there was only a few seconds of silence outside the house, and a familiar voice sounded. Xiao Chao, it's Mom. Open the door quickly. I paused for a moment and opened the door. She stood outside the house, her whole body was wet by the rain, and there was a faint strange smell on her body. As soon as she entered the door, she knelt on the ground with a poof. Mom, what are you doing? I was frightened by this sudden coquettish operation, but soon a bad premonition surged in my heart. Sure enough, it was my cousin who made trouble again. 21. Because of my aunt's previous live broadcast, my cousin also became a celebrity in the school for a while, the kind of black and red. He suffered from the guidance of his classmates at school, and his psychology gradually distorted. So, one night, he asked one of the classmates who laughed at him the most to go to school, stabbed the classmate with a knife and killed him on the spot. The funny thing is that my mother came home and begged me to pay for him for the sake of this little beast. Chow, your uncle is gone, your cousin is out of support, and his bastard classmate still laughs at him. It's really not his fault. He was also angry for a moment, so I interrupted my mother irritably. I really didn't expect that my mother would think of pushing out her own son to take the blame for the sake of my uncle's bad family. In the past, I may have felt that she had some wrong ideas because she was influenced since she was a child. Now I can only say that my mother has grown crooked from the bones. When my mother saw me interrupting, she was even more emotional and screamed, He Chow, if you hadn't cursed your uncle, would your cousin have done such a thing? You touched your conscience and said, Don't you have to be responsible? I looked at her coldly and only replied with 2 words faintly. You deserve it. Do you deserve it? She repeated it and suddenly laughed. A little crazy. Your grandmother is right. If you are not surnamed Zhang, it is impossible for you to think about me. She slowly got up, strode into the kitchen, and took out a knife. I retreated in horror and retreated to the edge of the wall. She did put the knife on her neck and threatened with a distorted face. He Chow, if you don't go today, I will die here. Anyway, you have also forced me to die, and you don't want my life. The family is broken and the people are dead. She never thought that I was her family, and she never looked at our little family in her eyes. My heart twitched, and I only felt extremely sad. Good. I'm going. Zhang Yuan. Let's cut off the mother-child relationship from today on. I'm also crazy, shouting. But after hearing this, she seemed to put down a stone in her heart, and her eyes softened again. She stretched out her hand and seemed to want to touch my cheek, but I dodged it. Where are you going? To take the raincoat. I kicked open my door, and after a while, I took out a raincoat and put it on my body. 22. The body of my cousin is near the back door of the school, where the gate has been closed for many years, and the surrounding area is wilderness, and no one comes and goes. When we got there, my cousin and aunt were digging a hole and looked like they were about to bury the bodies. I don't understand what they asked me to do. My mother asked me to see the corpse, saying that she wanted me to remember the appearance of the corpse. It was not easy to cross the gang when I surrendered. So thoughtful. I snorted mockingly, walked to the body and squatted down. At a glance, I spit it out. The more than a dozen knife wounds on the corpse are just trivial. The most frightening thing is that the corpse's face was smashed to pieces by something, and even the facial features could not be distinguished. I was so scared that I fell to the ground. I'm sure it's not what my cousin can do. In an instant, I seemed to realize something, but a sharp pain suddenly came from the back of my head, and I lost consciousness the next second. 23. When I woke up again, I was in the hospital, and my father was watching by my side with red eyes. When I woke up, his tight face finally relaxed. Dad. Fortunately, I sent a message to my father before I went out, and I opened a WeChat location with him so that he could find me in time at the last minute. At this time, 2 policemen came in from outside the door, and it seemed that they were looking for me. Chow, right? We have a few questions for you. The police told me that my mother and aunt actually wanted to knock me out, and then faked that I lost my footing and fell to the bottom of the pit after killing. My 3 views have been refreshed again. 24. Seeing my mother again, she has been criminally detained. The first time she saw me, she burst into tears. Chow, I'm sorry, Mom. Mom just thinks your cousin is so pitiful. I looked at her without any waves. Her crying and choking apology did not stir up a trace of fluctuation in my heart. After she confided in a lot of things that I was indifferent to, she suddenly looked at me with burning eyes and asked seriously, Chow, will you forgive your mother, right? I know I'm wrong. I will behave well. When I come out, we will live a good life. I responded with a smile. No, Mom. Oh no, Zhang Yuanyu. You should help them from now on. After all, you are a family.in addition. This divorce agreement has been signed. My father is still waiting. After the college entrance examination, my father and I will leave here, and we will probably never see each other again. After saying that, I noticed that her eyes quickly darkened. Most of them really felt ill. She didn't say anything more and got up silently and left the visiting room. As for my aunt, she was still hysterical when she saw me, stubbornly thinking that I had caused their family to die. Chow, you morning star, you can't die. The prison guard shouted sternly to stop her for a moment. Seeing that she was still so arrogant, I laughed. After all, I still have a big gift to give her. I hope she will like it. 25. I watched my cousin being pulled out of the youth control center again, and waved to him with a smile. His expression was full of resentment, and he wiped my neck at me. He hates me. He should. After all, with my help, his youth will be dedicated to the tears of the Iron Window. The police said that my cousin was under 14 years old and could not be sentenced to criminal punishment, of course, including my mother and aunt. So I provided the police with a key clue, the clue that my uncle entrusted the hospital to issue a fake birth certificate. That's right, the cousin's actual date of birth is half a year earlier than the ID card. That is to say, he is actually over 14 years old and should be criminally punished. Ironically, the reason why I knew about it was because my mother would give my cousin a birthday gift twice a year, and I also found something wrong with it in the long run. So, under my cliché, my cousin inadvertently revealed the fact that his birth certificate had been changed. 26. In the college entrance examination, I was admitted to a university in a city as I wanted, and my father also sold his house and moved to City A with me where I settled down. College life is full of happiness, and I also found a girlfriend during college. She is the only daughter in the family. She is very beautiful, optimistic and independent by nature. After hearing the story of my family, she not only didn't care about my family background, but also sympathized with my past. For my mother, she has a feeling of hatred. According to her, the greatest sadness in a girl's life is to be willing to be an accessory. After graduating from college, we quickly got married, but instead of having children right away, we both began to work hard and encourage each other on the road of life. The full text is finished.